as well, eat with us and experience it, not just hear about it. So that's very important. Also, last time I gave out some brochures, and most of you got those. For those of you that weren't here last time or didn't come to the monastery, there are more brochures here, and there are really 5 sets of brochures. The most basic one is this, the One Church and the Communion of Churches, explaining all about the Eastern Catholic churches. I have to, oh, very good. Do you see me now? So that's that. And then we have 4 brochures, smaller brochures. So if you haven't got one of each of those 5 items, please come and they're at the table here and help yourself. Now the other thing is the newsletter, our latest newsletter, and I hope Father Maximus brought it up. The last, most recent newsletter is newly published, so even if you were here last time, you wouldn't have had that. So everyone can take one of those if we've got enough copies. Okay. Any questions before we go on about that simple instruction stuff? Okay. Now, I'm going to talk just very briefly about our mission, and then the second part of the talk will be more exciting, at least for me, and you'll find out why, because Jim's given me a very interesting topic to talk about. The topic he gave me to talk about today, which I'll only spend the second half of my talk, and it's a topic I'll have no problem in speaking to you about. He said, I want you to imagine that you've got unlimited financial support, as much money as you want. What would you do with it? How would you go about expanding the mission of the monastery, what you're on about? So I won't be lost for words. I'll have lots to say. But before we get to that, I'm sure most of you too have a lot could address that topic. If someone said to you, you had unlimited financial resources, what would you do with it? You wouldn't be lost for words either, right? So Jim's very kind to offer me that opportunity to speak about that. But before we speak about that, because some of you have not come to the monastery and have not heard me before, I need to recap a little bit about what we're trying to do. Okay? What we're trying to do in the new evangelization. The new evangelization, which has been launched this year, is to address a certain crisis in the church that in a lot of parts of the world, Western Europe, the United States, where Christianity, and particularly the Catholic Church, have been so dominant for many hundred, sometimes 1,000 years, is now radically shrinking. Radically shrinking. If trends continue the way they're going, within 50 years, most of Western Europe will be Muslim. Within 50 years, the current trends. After 2,000 years of Christianity, mainly Catholicism. We need to address that. We need to address that. And when it comes to, now in the US, the reality is a little bit different. I don't think that Islam is growing as quickly, but secularism definitely is. And again in the US, the church, apart from the Hispanic presence, and that's why of course we've got a Pope from South America now, apart from the Hispanic presence, if it was just white Americans, the future of the church would be as bleak as it is in Western Europe after 2,000 years. So we need to address this. And I know that for some of you, this is pretty close to home, because when I look at the age group that most of you belong to, most of you probably have been Catholics all your lives, have had a real Catholic education, formation, with the good and the bad that goes with that. It's only human as well as divine institution. But I know for many of you, your children and your grandchildren, and sometimes your great-grandchildren, have probably been lost to the church. Put up your hand if you feel you're in that situation, that either children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren. That's a lot. So we need to address this problem. We need to address this problem. And the bishops from the Pope down have said this. That's what the new evangelization is about. They said something is wrong. The message that we're preaching is not getting through. We need to look at it. We need to know what to do. And part of the problem, of course, is that since the Second Vatican Council, it was an attempt to address this problem really at a very early period, 50 years ago. Unfortunately, the wonderful optimistic vision of the Council never got implemented in the right way. It was hijacked afterwards. And so from what resulted is more confusion and more chaos and more shrinkage in the church. So we need to go back and say, what did the Second Vatican Council really mean? What is the new evangelization really about? It can't be about what's happening, because the church is shrinking. So it couldn't have been gotten right. We're doing something wrong. Right? If your children, grandchildren, there's something going that isn't as should be. How do we go about solving that? Or at least addressing it? Now, there are many theories about what to do. Some people want to go back to a 1950s American kind of Roman Catholicism, just like it was before the Council, because the faith, at least in America, was pretty strong then. Not anymore. Others say, well, we need to be more politically active. We need to be more popular and more engaged in the culture around us. Other people say we need to be more separate from the culture around us, like we were pre-Vatican II, and so on. Now, the direction, the charism, the strategy that we take at Holy Resurrection Monastery is probably a new one to a lot of you. We are not guaranteed of success. We are not the only solution, but I think we are an important approach that even though we're small, a monastery of 5-6 months and 4 nuns in Olympia, we are trying to do something for the new evangelization here in the US that very few others are doing. And I think what we're trying to do has not been heard enough. We haven't been given yet, unfortunately, enough support to be able to really launch our strategy effectively. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the second part of my talk. Now, I spoke to you a lot about history last time and the Eastern churches. And I said that part of the reason why the Catholic Church is in such crisis is that for too long most Catholics don't really know the Catholic Church. I don't think I've met any ex-Catholic that was really a Catholic. They were what they thought was a Catholic. And of course, a watered-down version of the Church cannot withstand the pressures and challenges of a very aggressive secularism. But if we really are Catholics, formed deeply, richly, with the rich heritage of the Church, the deep theology of the Church, then we will be in a much better position to keep our faith and to give it to our children effectively and for them to pass it on. That hasn't happened yet. And the reason, one of the main reasons it hasn't happened, and I think I spoke to you this last time, is that if we only know Western Christianity, if we only know the Roman Catholic Church, we are not Catholic. Half of the Church, and not only half of the Church in the period we live in, but half of the Church from the time of the Apostles has been Eastern. And most Roman Catholics don't know that. And that's where the rot starts to set in. That's when already our faith has been reduced. We need to rediscover the fullness of our faith. What Pope John Paul II said, the Church breathing again with two lungs, the East and the West. And, you know, the Eastern churches aren't just these funny ethnic churches of other ethnic people. They are part of the apostolic faith, the apostolic Catholic Orthodox faith. They are as apostolic as the Western approach to theology and faith. And they need to be rediscovered because of all sorts of reasons to do with the West, Western Europe, the Western Church, Western culture, which is the predominant culture in the First World. Secularism has attacked Western culture and Western Christianity. And so, because we haven't been effective enough in defending ourselves, a lot of our younger generations have been negatively influenced by a very superficial, prejudiced media. The Western Church, unfortunately, because of the way it's portrayed by the secularists, has a lot of negative baggage. And it's going to take a long time to defend ourselves against this negative baggage, because people don't understand, haven't formed properly. Certainly that has to be done. That has to be done. But I think there is another approach that is equally important, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rediscover another apostolic tradition of the Catholic Church that has been eclipsed for over 1,000 years. And because of that, there's a freshness to it. The baggage isn't there as much because it was unknown. So the secularists haven't got all these prejudicial arguments against Eastern Christianity because they don't know about it. And I think that if we are able to re-tap into that common Catholic faith of ours, the Eastern one, as well as the West, we will be able to more effectively preach in this new evangelization in a way that it will be much more difficult for secularists to attack. Besides, it's politically correct to attack the Roman Catholic Church, you know that. Read our newspapers. Lots of prejudice there. The Eastern churches are a minority, and they've been persecuted by communism, godless communism, for 70, 80 years, and before that, by Islam, for many hundreds of years. So it's not as politically correct to attack Eastern Christianity. Better to just, the approach to take is to ignore them. Much more politically sensitive, even from secularists and progressives, to directly attack these struggling churches that go back to the apostles, that are fully Catholic, but have been persecuted for so long because they've been the underdog. So we have a fresh way, and in many ways a more appealing way to the modern mind, of preaching the fundamentals of the faith. That's why I think Bishop David Ricken is so keen to have us here at the diocese. We can present in a different way the apostolic tradition of the Church, which is as apostolic, the same as in the Roman Catholic Church, but in different language, in different theology, in different structure that people haven't heard before, that is not new, that is equally apostolic, and yet it's not novel, and yet it's new to people because they haven't heard it before. And let's face it, when I speak to people younger than yourselves, like your children, your grandchildren, they haven't heard it before either, so they're interested usually. We have lots of young people coming to our monastery and wide-eyed, listening to everything I say, because they haven't heard it before. They haven't heard it before. Now, I'll give you an example to help you understand what I'm saying. I went to school, I can be heard, but I can't be seen, right? They say the opposite to young kids, right? I want you to be seen but not heard, but it's the opposite. I want to share with you something of my own background, the way I learned English. English wasn't my first language. I'm Greek and I was born in Egypt, but I went to Australia when I was very young. Grew up in Australia from the age of 6, so I'm pretty much Australian. When I was in elementary school, it was that time when education was changing and becoming more progressive. And so for most of you, when you went to elementary school, you would have learned English grammar, right? The subject and the predicate and how to diagram sentences. Well, I was born in 57. By the time I was in elementary school in Australia, and Joe's an educationist, so he knows, that was kind of all had. They had all sorts of different theories about teaching English, and that wasn't done anymore. So I went through elementary school without knowing anything about grammar. I got by, I was able to talk, but I didn't know how to diagram a sentence. And so I didn't know the fundamentals about Indo-European languages. When I went to high school, I studied French, another language. I don't speak French. I read a little bit. I'm not a Frenchman. But guess what? Through learning French, I learned about grammar. I learned how to diagram sentences and the fundamentals of Indo-European languages, including English. Now that's an illustration that I want to leave with you, because that's what I'm hoping will happen. By Roman Catholics learning about the Eastern Catholic churches, part of the Catholic Church but from a different tradition, it will help you, or the younger generations, to discover the fundamentals of Catholic theology that aren't taught anymore in the Roman Catholic Church. Just like I learned English grammar by learning another language. Roman Catholics, particularly the younger generation, but you have to encourage them, can relearn the fundamentals of the Catholic faith by learning it through the Eastern churches. That's my theory. That's what we're hoping to do. And one other outcome, I think, of that will be the Catholic Church, particularly, probably maybe less so in places like South America, but in Europe, in Western Europe particularly, and in the United States very much so, I don't know if you've noticed it, but the Catholic Church is very polarized. Very polarized. A lot of contention of what it means to be a Catholic, and who is a Catholic and who isn't a Catholic. And rightly so. It's a shame that this polarization takes place, but often it takes place because people have a superficial understanding of the faith. And with a deeper understanding of the faith, I think some of this polarization will disappear of its own accord. And we hope to make a contribution there, because I do believe that in the Eastern churches, the Eastern Catholic churches, the fullness of the faith is expressed in a way that can soften the polarity in Western Christianity. I'll give you a simple example to help you understand what I'm talking about. One of the most contentious polarization issues in the Roman Catholic Church, I think, is the liturgy of the Mass, the way it's celebrated after Vatican II and so on. On the one hand, you have people that want the Mass in Latin, like it was in the old days, very silent, very formal, very quiet. The priest a long way away with his back to the people. A lot of talk about hell and purgatory, individualistic piety. That's what it was like in the 50s, right? And then you get the other extreme of people that want, well, they wanted everything in English. They want top of the chart music, guitars. They want entertainment, puppet shows, or the priest as a clown. That's a bit, probably not in this diocese, but it happens. Very informal setting around the altar, the priest facing the people, much more emphasis on the horizontal rather than the vertical dimension of the Mass, of the liturgy. More a meal than a sacrifice, so on and so on. And these two groups are always fighting. Our church is neither one nor the other, and it's as equally apostolic as the Roman Catholic Church. The way we celebrate liturgy, which is part of the Byzantine tradition in the monastery, it's very traditional, curtains, but we do everything in English. Everything is in English, pretty much. And we sometimes use Greek, the liturgical language, or Slavonic, or Romanian, or nobody cares. We just go from one to the other. It doesn't become an issue. We sing everything. It's very spontaneous. It's not quiet and kind of pietistic. Everyone participates. It's long, but it's happy and cheerful, an emphasis on the resurrection. And as a result, we have a lot of Roman Catholics, either progressive or very conservative, and they come to our place and they love it. So it does do something to break down this polarity. I think we need to make more of this. I think much more can be, we can make a real contribution in this, I think. A really important contribution. And that's only in the area of liturgy, but it applies to all areas. For example, in our church traditionally, we have married priests. That's an issue. We have married priests. The majority of priests in the Eastern Catholic churches worldwide, and progressively more so in America, are married men. But we also have monks, monastic life, that look like Father Maximus and me. Pretty radically monastic. Not just.
No one would marry us.
Nobody would marry us, exactly. And long beards and wearing habits all the time. That's the tradition. It's both. We don't have a celibate priesthood, but we also don't have a kind of more relaxed kind of religious life. We have both. We have a married priesthood, but we also have a very traditional form of monastic life, and the bishops are chosen from the monks. So again, this is something different. Another one is women's issues. The issue of women's ordination and so on, and the polarity that's causing in the church Well, we don't have married priests. We have married priests, we don't have women priests. But in the Eastern churches, it is much more emphasized that the priesthood of all believers is much more important than the ministerial priesthood. And the example of the priesthood of all believers, par excellence, is not the ministerial priesthood, but monastic life. Monastic life is the reference point for all the baptized, as Pope John Paul II said, to what the priesthood of all believers is essentially about. And men and women are equally called to monastic life. And in the Eastern churches, monastic life for men and women is almost the same. The habit's the same, way of life is the same. The abbess acts more or less like an abbot. She doesn't celebrate the liturgy, but believe me, abbesses look the part. They wear crosses and give blessings and hold the pastoral staff. They look just like a bishop. So there's ways of, there's a lot we can do. And this isn't a new innovation. This has been the Catholic way of doing things for 1800 years, 1700 years. Most Roman Catholics haven't got a clue about that. And I think knowing about that, as I say, would soften this polarization that's based on a superficial, rather naive understanding of the Catholic faith. We don't need to forever fight about married priests or celibate priests. We don't need to forever fight about whether women can be ordained to the ministerial priesthood. We don't need to fight about whether the Mass needs to be in English or in Latin. There's another way of looking at all this stuff that can make us much more sensible, much more, much deeper in our appreciation, much more circumspect. And yet it's not in a new way of thinking, it's a way of thinking that's always existed, we just haven't known it in the West. Really important. All right, before now I go to my favorite topic about if I have unlimited money, what would I do with it? I want to leave some opportunity for questions about what I've said from anyone. Is what I'm saying, does it make sense? You don't have to understand every detail, but just generally, does it make sense? You have any questions? Yes?
What's the population of Eastern Catholicism versus Western Catholicism?
Okay. Roman Catholics, of course, are probably over 1 billion worldwide.
Okay.
In the Eastern churches, the Eastern tradition, Eastern Christians, those that are Catholic, altogether, probably no more than 20 million. But the Orthodox, which are not Catholic, but the Catholic Church recognizes as valid churches with valid sacraments and share exactly the same tradition as the Eastern Catholics, are probably close to 400 million. 400 million. And they go back to the apostles, just like the Roman Catholic Church does. That's a big part of the apostolic heritage. Any other questions? Yes?
Last time you were here, you mentioned the divorce, the difference in your approach.
That's another one, yes. Mm-hmm.
What's your stance on the gay population?
Again, the gay issue. Again, this is complex. This is another very important thing. The theology, it's complex and I don't have time to go into it deeply, but the theology between East and West, although it's fundamentally the same, because it has a slightly different nuanced definition of grace, it tends to be different. So the way of looking at sexuality and sexual immorality in the East, it's the same teaching, but it's less juridical, less rule-orientated. It's got a slightly different nuance. And so I think the whole issue of homosexuality and stuff like that, it's the same fundamental teaching, but the approach to dealing with it is very different. Very different. I think, to sum it up, in the Eastern Church, they would say, well, there's no such thing as homosexuality, but we're all sinners and we all fall and we all need grace and we all need redemption. So just, try your best and keep living your life. A little bit like some of the things that Pope Francis is saying now. And by the way, very interesting, I said this at my last talk, Pope Francis knows the Eastern Churches very well. From the time he was a seminarian, he used to serve the Byzantine liturgy every day because one of his professors was a Byzantine Catholic priest. And he has kept up that contact with the Eastern Churches all through his priestly ministry, including the Orthodox churches. So he knows the Orthodox churches very well, and he speaks so highly. Now, it's true, when I say that, traditional Roman Catholics say to me, well, it'd be nice if he said all the nice things he says about the Byzantine liturgy, it'd be nice if he said it about the traditional Roman Catholic liturgy. Well, maybe. I can't talk for that, and it's true that he's pretty quiet about that, but he's not quiet about the Byzantine liturgy. He's very vocal about how important he thinks it is. Any other questions? Yes?
All our religions are against abortion, but our government they do nothing about it. Why is it our government, when all the religions condemn abortion, why doesn't our government just ignores it? They don't do nothing about it.
Because our government is irreligious.
Well, we know.
That's the secularism.
Yeah, but we're the majority. The religions, aren't we?
Well, we are the majority, and but the trouble is the politically correct, the intelligentsia that have the media, don't represent the majority, and they are basically secularists. And that's what we have to fight. But we brought it upon ourselves. For 50 years, we've run universities and Catholic universities. Joe will know about this, and we've spent billions and billions of dollars. Notre Dame itself has a higher budget than the Vatican, just one Catholic university. And yet what comes out at the end, after kids that know nothing about the faith, of course they stop going to church. We brought that on ourselves. That is irresponsible. We spend so much, and then we that are trying to start a new approach to say there's something wrong here, we need to try something else, we hardly can raise enough money to survive.
Isn't one of the commandments, thou shalt not kill?
Absolutely.
Hello?
But we have to be able to package it in a way that people will hear that. That's what it's about. You can say, and they'll say, well, you're just hung up about sex. You're happy because it's about abortion's not murder. That's what they'll say. I don't want you to enter and telling me how to do in my bedroom. That's it. You have to be able to say it in a way that people are going to listen. And that's why saying it in an Eastern way, they haven't heard those arguments before. Because Western theology is based pretty heavily on Augustine, they secularists, Catholics just care about sex. Well, they're not going to tell me what to do in the bedroom. That's the way they see it. They don't see it as murder. That's why if we take an Eastern approach, they're not going to necessarily agree with it straight away, but they've never heard it before. You talked about sexual morality in a way that they haven't heard, and that's equally old, traditional, apostolic. So you kind of stump them. They don't know what to say. And then they might start to think. So how you package it is very important. Any other questions? Yes?
I have a niece that's been studying her religious faith quite extensively.
I have a niece that's been studying her faith very extensively. She's gone to college and does a lot of ministry within her church. And her frustration is that she cannot become a priest. Now, your Eastern faith tries to enhance the woman's position, but it sounds like you still don't allow them to celebrate Mass and the consecration.
Okay, if you knew, see, it's not about what you're letting someone do or not do. It's not political, it's something about reality. In the church, Western or Eastern, in the church, Western or Eastern, there have never been women priests. And And so the church says, do we know that Jesus didn't want women priests? We don't know. He never ordained them. We know he ordained men, and they were present at the Last Supper. That's all we've got to go on. We can't make it up as we go just because it's becoming fashionable. We have to follow what Jesus left us in the apostolic faith and what he passed on the apostles. Because if we don't do that, then it all falls apart. It all falls apart, because then anything is up for grabs. So that's the reality. We can't change these things lightly, because then we can change the Trinity. Then we can change the divine and human nature of Christ. Anything that's been defined by the church and has always been taught, when we begin to change it, so a lot is at stake. So the Eastern Church and the Western Church equally have the same notion of priesthood, of ministerial priesthood, that women, we can't change something that we're not competent to change. Until we're sure we can't do that. We know that Jesus had men at the Last Supper. We don't know that he didn't want women, but we know that he didn't have them. All we've got to go on is what he left us. However, I think a lot of the issues is because in the Western Church has become so clerical, and the ministerial priesthood has become so important and emphasized so much, and the priesthood of all believers has been, including monastic life, has been marginalized. And so, of course, if you're going to emphasize the ministerial priesthood so much, then people are going to say, well, I was baptized, I'm a member of the priesthood of all believers, why can't I be a priest? In the Eastern Church, that is less so. Remember, we have a married clergy, we have celibate priests, we have monastic priests, and we have monks or nuns that of course aren't priests. And so it's not, the emphasis isn't on the ministerial priesthood. It's much more understood that even a bishop could learn a lot from a very holy old nun who is a better representation of the priesthood of all believers than him, even though he's a bishop. See, that's been lost sight of in the West.
Can I have a little rebuttal on that?
My only rebuttal on that is if you think of the faith, the Jewish faith in Jesus' time, the women were not considered equal to men. They were not treated equal to men. And therefore, the mindset, even with Jesus being our leader, was not treating women the same way.
Okay, I don't want to get too much brought into this because it's a complex issue, but what I would say is that actually is not true. In the pagan religions at the time of our Lord, they had women priestesses. It was very common. So that's not quite true. And if you say that, well, then you have to say, well, what Jesus taught about morality is only a part of his time. We should be able to have gay marriages. It was just socially conditioned that men and women could only be. In the pagan religions, they had that. So where do you stop? The thing is, we've only got to know, we can only go on from what we've got to know. That's all we've got. I'm not saying that, I don't think the church says women can't be ordained priests. The church doesn't say that. What the official teaching of the church is, we don't know. And until we are sure, we can't do it because there's too much at stake. That's the teaching of the church. Any other questions? And you haven't let me get on my favorite topic there. Last question, and then I want to tell you about how I would spend if I had unlimited financial resources.
What do we do as parents? We have children that one son, his wife turned Catholic for him when he got married, and another one, they go to different churches.
What do we do? What do we do with our children?
We pray for them.
We pray for them. That's most important. Okay. No, there's more. There's more. We pray for them. And this is going to be a good introduction to the next section of my talk. You support Holy Resurrection Monastery and you try to get them to come and visit us or read something that we've put out. or hear the talk that I'm giving today. It might prick some sort of interest. They might say, well, we can't say we've heard all that before because we haven't. Maybe our summation of the Catholic Church, maybe it wasn't completely accurate. Maybe there's more to it than we were led to believe. And that might be a way of reconnecting them, re-bringing them back to the church, saying, you know, I had a simplistic understanding of what the church speaks about sex. Sure, the Western church has a particular kind of emphasis, but that's not the last word on it. So I think you can do more. Prayer is the most important. But I think, for example, if you support us, that we can say this more widely to people like your children and their children, get them to listen to this, get them to come and visit us. They might not. Some are hardened atheists, hardened agnostic, hardened secularists, but the majority of ex-Catholics are not. The majority of ex-Catholics never really knew their own faith. Did we know our own faith? Probably not very deeply, but we didn't need to because we lived in a much more Christian culture. It wasn't challenged to the same degree. What we passed on to our children, although it got us by, the challenges they face are much more aggressive. They can't get by on the knowledge of the faith that we had. They need a deeper because the challenges are greater. That's what the issue is. That's what the issue is.
We had last question up there.
We have,
One more last.
We have 4 wonderful grandchildren who are now Baptists. Would everybody here say a prayer for them?
We'll do. We'll pray for them, and we'll pray that they become Roman Catholics again, but through the Byzantine Catholic Church, right? That's what we pray. Okay, if I had unlimited money, well, have you got a whole week to hear me out? The essential thing that I would want is I would want that we have enough money. First of all, of course, we have to live. We're human beings, we're not angels. And Father Maximus and Father Nicholas are very human beings, as I tap my tummy. So before we can be a witness of the Eastern charism in the new evangelization, the Eastern Christian charism, we need to be able to survive. And we need to be able to support young monks that are coming, and thanks be to God, although we're small, we're only 5 months, we're a relatively young community, and we've got 3 more postulants coming next year. Very good quality guys. One of them's a Catholic journalist, so he's going to be very helpful to us. Very young guys, bright, all college educated. So we need to have enough money to feed them, health insure them, pay off our mortgage so there's somewhere for them to live. That's very basic. And at the moment, the way we're going, what we're doing is not widely known enough to get enough support from people that have become... we want more people to be stakeholders in what we're trying to do. That's what it's about. If we had more stakeholders that believed in what we're trying to do, because it's unusual, it's a new way, but that's what we have to do in the new evangelization, right? We have to find new ways that are both, in our instance, new and old. So we have to increase the number of our stakeholders and their generosity so that we can continue to do what we're doing, to give talks like this to as wide, as many people as possible. Remember I said it's not just about telling though, it's about experiencing. So telling them isn't enough. Our monastery needs to be big enough and able also to receive guests like it received you, so that you can actually see this in action, the prayer, the liturgical prayer, the life, not just hear about it. And of course that means that we have to pay off our mortgage, that we have to keep the building, the facility in good repair. Our mortgage is what, Father Maximus, our mortgage is what, $350,000 to go or something? Yeah. Something like that. We have to do at least $20,000 renovation on the monastery. Our monastery, part of it is 140 years old, needs to be kept up. It's a historic building with a third religious presence there, the third religious community in that monastery going back to 1866. But it needs to be kept up. Then we need to have money in order to travel and to go out and give more of these talks, to educate the new monks coming along. Most campaigns in the Catholic Church talk in the area of millions. Well, we're small and we're modest. If you want to give me millions, I'll take them. But we don't need millions. We don't need millions. A few $100,000 would go a long way for us. A long, long way to keep us going. I think Father Maximus figured out, we've moved from California, so we've lost some of our donor base because we moved. We moved because Bishop Ricken wanted us here, and we thought there was more potential because of his help and vocations, and also the facility. California is very expensive. Our facility that we bought here for about $450,000, in California, a similar facility would have probably cost $3 million easily. Just can't afford that. So we moved, but it means, a lot of the people that we were close to, some of the foundations, don't support us now because they're more locally based. So in the next 3 years, we need to be able to raise at least $75,000 a year, which is a third of our budget. We've been able to build up at least 2/3 of our coping with that, but the move has kind of made it essential that we increase. We will be for the next 3 or 4 years probably a third of our budget short. So we need to find some new local foundations and local stakeholders that will support us if they appreciate our presence here in Wisconsin. I don't know that I can say much more than that. I think I've said enough about, I could go on and on and on and on about what I could do with money, but, Jim's coming up, so he wants to say something. No? Okay.
Abbot,
Yes.
is Bishop Ricken supporting you
Is
financially?
Bishop David Ricken, as yet, is not supporting us financially, but he is supporting us morally. He's allowing us to go to his parishes and raise money. He is paying us money to go to the parishes and speak about the Eastern churches. So he is, but nothing major yet. But I have hopes. But he's certainly very supportive of us. Thanks be to God. That's why we came. Because our diocese, the Romanian Greek Catholic Diocese, is all America and Canada, and we have about 5,000 faithful. Very few people, vast territory, very little resources. But we're not here just for our eparchy. We're part of the eparchy canonically, but we're here for the new evangelization for the whole church. And that's why we depend on Roman Catholics to invest in us, to become stakeholders, because our ministry isn't just to the Romanian Catholic Church, it's to you. That's why I'm here this morning, and that's why you've come to our monastery. Any other questions? Comments? Has anyone got a check ready for me already? Okay, so remember Father Maximus is back there with the pies, and if anyone wants to come and talk to me privately, we can do that. And is there anything else, Jim, anything else that I missed out? I've covered everything. Okay, it's been a delight to talk to you. Check our webpage. The details of our webpage are on the literature I've given out. Come and visit. Some of you have been, some of you haven't been. Come and visit again. We're always there. Just email us or phone just to make sure that we're going to be home. Not some other place doing what I'm doing this morning. God bless you.